Even men at the top of their game find themselves wanting more from life. Whether it's more meaning, unshakable confidence, a bigger impact, more money, deeper love, a hotter sex life, or a powerful legacy. Find out how good your life can be on this episode of Man Alive. Also, as I've supported men in their love and work lives for 15 years now, many men ask for the right words to say to be more successful, attractive, and desirable. But I found it's not so simple as giving scripts or lines because every man is different. So giving words or scripts would be like giving a tall, thin man a shorter, wider man's pants, or vice versa. The words have to make sense for you and your personality, and there's so much happening beneath the surface that people are responding to. If you're interested in how to become a better lover and leader in your own unique way, go to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz, or you can text ALIVE to 44144. It only takes a couple minutes and you'll start to get an idea of how you can be both more respected and desired. After you fill it out, we can schedule a time to review your quiz and talk about your specific challenges and desires. So again, go to either shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text ALIVE to 44144. That's ALIVE to 44144. Enjoy this episode of Man Alive. Hello, and welcome to this episode of Man Alive. I'm excited to be here today with Dr. Jocelyn Lehrer. Jocelyn, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so today's episode, we're going to talk about Jocelyn's creation, which is the Men's Story Project, and I'm going to share a little bit about it, and then I'll have Jocelyn, introduce it even more. I found Jocelyn through, I think it was a friend of a friend, and who pointed me to the Men's Story Project, and I've been watching the videos of men sharing their stories, and it's profound. I'm so glad you're in the world. I'll have to, it's like I've often felt working with men like, okay, how do we have a bigger impact? How do we continue to support men in a bigger way to really feel like they can be themselves and be comfortable and not have to, live up to these toxic ideas of what masculinity is. And I see what you're doing is having a huge impact. So thank you so much for creating it.
It's been a labor of love.
Yes, I imagine.
Yeah.
So let me give a little intro and then you can tell us more about it. So Jocelyn wrote that in the US and around the world, social ideas about masculinity contribute to challenges including men's violence against women and other men, bullying, homo and transphobia, HIV, AIDS, men's reduced seeking of physical and mental health care, and gender inequality. But public dialogue around masculinity is still rare, and people don't often realize that there is a lot to talk about or that it can actually be changed, and how boys are actually socialized to be men can be changed. So the Men's Story Project was founded by Jocelyn in 2008 to address this need, and it really helps groups create live story sharing events, documentaries, and social media where men and boys publicly explore social ideas about manhood through the lens of their own life experience. As a movement building project, the MSP helps groups crowdsource culture change and social ideas about masculinity via men's own voices and stories, which I love that part. And it catalyzes a large-scale emergence of men around the world who are taking a personal public stand for healthy masculinities, violence prevention, and social justice. So
that's the goal. Yeah.
Yes, that's the goal, right? And to watch these men actually telling their stories of their own struggles and the ways that they were raised or challenges that they had, and to be vulnerable, which is, even more challenging, I think, for men than than for women, maybe not for all genders, right? But for women, it can be more challenging to be vulnerable as a man. So it was really beautiful. So I want to hear about it from you. Like, what had you create this? And then I want to at some point get into, how do you help these men actually feel safe to tell their stories? But let's start with you and how you created this.
Yeah. So for me, I tend to say that what led me to start this project was a combination of personal and professional. So on the professional front, my background's in public health. So I have a doctoral degree in public health. which I did at the Harvard School of Public Health, and then I did a postdoctoral research fellowship at the University of California, San Francisco Center for AIDS Prevention Studies.
Mm.
And so for a number of years, I was doing research related to adolescent sexual health and mental health and dating violence and sexual assault, and
topics
and sexual risk behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And then I spent around 8.5 years co-facilitating a weekly support group as a volunteer, mostly with young gay men and trans women who are living with HIV in the Bay Area. I spent time working with San Francisco Women Against Rape, which is San Francisco's oldest and biggest rape crisis center.
Wow.
And right when I finished my undergrad, I also spent time working with a gang risk intervention program in a public school in San Francisco. And that was mostly with middle school boys who were being recruited into gangs.
Oh my God.
And so the bottom line is, like, when you work in all of these realms, and I also, in the personal part is, I have countless friends and some family members who are survivors of different forms of violence.
Yeah.
I've also lived this life, in the female form that I have, and experienced, different forms of aggression that are lower on the spectrum, but they've been real for me, or real. And so the combination of professional work and then personal life experience showed me that it basically, all the roads point to the topic of masculinity, where if we could help to shift social notions of masculinity, it would really help to improve health and well-being for men themselves and also people of all genders, in the world. Yeah. And yet, where's the public dialogue? And also to say, this is not just about health and well-being, it's also about social justice and people's rights to live with health and well-being and equity and so on. So from both a public health and social justice perspective, I felt that creating forums, where we could talk about these things would be really helpful.
Amazing.
But, and through people's own voices and stories, because soapboxes are both boring and ineffective,
right.
So, and so I'm happy to share a lot more about the pedagogy underlying this, because it's very rooted in social change research and public health research.
Yeah. I mean, amazing. Okay. So you had this vision that you realized, okay, I don't want to stand on a soapbox because that's not actually, as effective. I want people to tell their own stories. How did you put this together? How did the vision turn into reality?
Well, it was a little bit, so when I was working at San Francisco Women Against Rape part-time, they were putting on a production of the Vagina Monologues. There was a production happening that was going to be a benefit for them.
Yep.
And so I put out the call, to invite people to come to that. And then I wrote at the bottom, if anyone wants to help me create something similar for men, let me know.
Nice.
Exclamation mark.
Yeah.
And a couple of men responded to that and said, yeah, that would be great. And then they didn't end up participating, but that kind of planted a seed. But then I also knew, just from public health research work, that it can be very powerful when people are sharing their own stories personally.
Yeah.
And so that's why I decided to take that approach. So it is very different pedagogically. I think sometimes the Vagina Monologues is used as the example, or isn't it similar to that? And I would say pedagogically, it's functioning differently when people are sharing their own true story in front of a live audience of their own community, where their family members and friends and coworkers and just people of their own local community are there bearing witness. And research has found that people learn the most in terms of attitudes and behaviors from peers and role models.
Yes.
Right? So this is consistent, and informed by research that shows that.
Yeah.
So we created that first live event. I put out that call for submissions. We had 17 presenters, and that first live event was packed. It was at La Peña Cultural Center in Berkeley on Shattuck.
I know where that is.
Yeah, and it was packed, and it was standing room only, and people sitting on the floor. And
amazing. What happened as a result of that event? Like, what did you see came out of that for the presenters and for the audience?
So we had a very strong positive response. Like, there was a standing ovation, and people were saying this is revolutionary and already historic, and it needs to keep happening. So that the written feedback also that we received from that was really helpful for me. And it basically showed me that we were onto something. And so and that it should continue, and that I should continue developing and exploring this kind of work. And so that's when I brought the project into, I was just starting then my postdoc at UCSF, and so I brought the work into my postdoc.
Yes.
And that's when I really discovered that there's this whole universe of research and activism around men and masculinity, so-called engaging boys and men, for healthy masculinities and gender justice. Some people use positive masculinities. Some people say, we don't even know what that is, so let's not use any words at all, or, But that's where I learned that there is this field. And that's also where I started learning more in a more in-depth way about entertainment education and narrative communication.
Yes.
Like that.
So I've watched some of the videos, but I'm curious to give men who are listening a sense of this, right? What are some of the kinds of stories, or some of the memorable stories, some of the ones that that stuck in your heart?
Oh, well, honestly, I would say that they all have in different ways. But so the stories center around that intersection of social ideas about masculinity, how men supposedly ought to be or can be, health topics and social justice topics. And so men have spoken about, and so actually just to lay out, some of those issues, right? And you were alluding to them before, but I'll just share them again, right? So bullying, hazing, boys being taught by their parents even to fight, and encouraged to fight. So violence between men and violence between boys, men's violence against women and people of all genders, men who don't seek healthcare or mental health care when they need to because they're being stoic and tough, unplanned pregnancy, car accidents because guys were being risky in cars together with their buddies, sexual assault and harassment is one form of gender-based violence. So like lots of different kinds of topics. And so men have talked about these things candidly, including, their own former perpetration of violence against a female partner and their journey of reflection and change and seeking support and lessons learned, or their own survivorship of, as having experienced sexual assault in childhood or as teenagers, resistance against, homophobia, racism, transphobia, when they've been on the receiving end of it, ableism, classism, so speaking up and asserting their own beauty and humanity and equality in the face of those oppressive.
How powerful for men to actually get to share those stories, not even just, write them in a way for themselves to find, the strength or the gold in that, but then to actually get to share that in a public way.
Yeah, that's right. So the three themes that I've kind of distilled from these kinds of stories are celebrating, challenging, and resisting. Right? So men giving thanks to sources of beauty and love in their life and so on, like mentorship and mentors and family members and traditions and strengthening. And then talking about challenging is like challenging those notions of masculinity that have fostered harm in their own life when they enacted them and played them out, or just challenging those notions that need to be challenged. And then resistance is talking again, like asserting their own beauty and strength and equality in the face of these other oppressive forces like racism and homophobia that have tried to suggest to them that they're less than equal.
Yeah.
Right? So that triad feels compelling to me right now in terms of thinking about the invitation. But really, like ultimately, the goal is to support men in sharing stories that will be helpful for them and also for an audience.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of thinking that has gone into things like, what does fully being responsible for harm that you've caused look like?
That's a beautiful question.
Yeah, like what does a full expression publicly of accountability for violence that you've perpetrated look like?
Wow. Do you have answers to those questions?
Well, my current thought is that, and I have it written in the training guide, but I think that the person really does need to believe that they're responsible for what they did. Need to express that. It's important for them to understand that there's a difference between an explanation and an excuse. right? So for example, somebody may have grown up in a household where they witnessed their own father being violent toward their mother. And so that's an explanation of where they learned that that can be acceptable behavior.
Yep.
However, it's not an excuse for your own choice to enact that kind of behavior, right? So they need to understand that they're fully responsible for their choice to use violence, even if there was a trajectory that really increased the likelihood that they would.
Right?
Yeah. They need to express regret for what they did. And they need to, and I think it's important with the project, for them to talk about what kind of journey they've been on to seek help and support to make the changes in their life that they've been making.
Yeah.
So there needs to be enough passage of time, and there needs to be enough support that they've been receiving and enough of a journey that they've been on for a reflection and change that they can talk about it publicly. And that, has included being part of men's groups, seeking therapy, going to AA, being part of a batterer intervention program, and going through the whole 52-week process. Like, it's been different for different people.
Yep.
So talking about that journey of change, and then also talking about their commitments for the future.
Yeah.
What kind of person they want to be and commit to being, what kind of relationship they'd like to create. So there's accountability, and there's also then sharing something that's useful for an audience. And pedagogically, like from a teaching standpoint, let's say there's someone in the audience who is currently being violent toward their partner, or who currently thinks that it's not a bad idea, right? And then they see somebody on stage who seems like a peer to them, or is part of their community, or has some aspects, of them, their life or identities that are similar to the person in the audience. And that person on stage is sharing about how they how they went from A to B, and not just, hey, I went from A to B and I used to be violent and now I'm not, and isn't that great? Thank you very much.
Right.
But
actually the struggle in there, and how
right?
Yes.
How did you go from A to B, and where did you seek support, and how was it for you, and what were challenges that you dealt with along the way, and what are your commitments for the future? And then the audience is likely to applaud at the end, right? And so which is interesting from a scientific standpoint, right? So social science. So for the person in the audience, when they see all of that, they're learning how that person went from A to B. They're seeing that that's a process that their community approves of and is appreciating that the person, did that and was willing to share that. And so all of that is a message to the person in the audience that says, I may be able to do this too.
Right.
Or it helps them come to that conclusion potentially, that they may be able to do.
And
this
here's a
too.
path.
Here's a path, and this is something that my community would appreciate.
Would approve of.
And value.
Okay, so I'm kind of, as I'm thinking about this, I heard some really intense stories, and I can also imagine that no matter whether a man thinks, oh, I went through something really intense, even if I didn't abuse or I wasn't abused or whatever, I could see that this would be useful for any man, right?
Yeah. There's an example that I like to give where I think about a very nice guy that I was in high school with named Joel, who used to wear Timberland boots that were clearly too big on him because he wanted to look bigger. And it would be perfectly wonderful if a guy wanted to participate in the Men's Story Project and share a poem for his boots.
Yes.
So I think, I definitely don't want to give the impression that this project is only for men who have stories that are particularly extreme or intense, but it's really about
sometimes it's like the men who haven't had such an extreme life are overlooked, like, well, you shouldn't be suffering, or you shouldn't, you've got it easy. Whereas I think what I see, and I'm curious if this is what you see too, it's like, that can be a really, a big challenge to have your mom not have been warm with you when you were young, right? But you don't think of it as like, oh, that's this big trauma necessarily.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think it's important to really emphasize that we all have stories, and we all have platforms where there are people in our life that would love to hear what we have to say, or that would welcome hearing what we have to say. One of the really interesting themes in terms of audience response is men reporting feelings of affirmation and realizing that they're not alone, and having had the experience of hearing, in this case, someone on stage talking about a topic that they've literally never heard a man speak about in public before.
Yes.
And so, yeah, absolutely. I think it's important for everyone to know that we all have stories. All of us have important life experiences, and there's beautiful value in sharing that with others.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you mentioned before that there's a connection between, men's well-being and these notions of masculinity. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit on that.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts. One is that to emphasize that masculinity is not some sort of concrete reality that's set in stone, right?
Yes.
So from a social science perspective, social ideas about gender are taught and learned. They vary across societies and time and place. They're malleable, they're changeable, they evolve. And so there's no fundamental entrenched thing called masculinity.
Which is actually fantastic to remember, because I think it becomes that way, right, in our minds.
That's right. And also society teaches us that. And society has these phrases like be a man, and what does it mean to be a real man? And like there's this notion, this made up notion that there's one right way to be a man.
Yeah.
And so I think starting off from the standpoint of understanding that it's actually all made up, is really helpful. Yeah. And people might get into thinking about, oh, well, what about testosterone? And let's talk about men are from Mars and women from Venus. And let's talk about fundamental gender differences. I'm not a biologist, but what I will say is that I think when we're talking about people's health and well-being, people's full, complete, human, beautiful self-expression, what matters the most is the choices that people make.
Yes.
Not how much testosterone you have coursing through your veins, right? Like if testosterone caused men's violence, then we would see much higher rates of men's violence in the world. Men would be committing acts of violence every day, right?
That's a good point.
Right. And so I personally am less interested in conversations about the effects of testosterone, and I'm much more interested in where do we have choice in our life to build the relationships that we want to build in all aspects of our lives, and just expressing ourselves as the full human beings that we are.
I think it's a really great distinction, right? If testosterone were the cause,
we would be overrun by violence.
Overrun, right? The whole world would be some kind of melting pot of violent activity, which you could argue that in some ways it is, but there are pockets where we actually have more peaceful experiences at this point. And so, if it was all based in testosterone versus how we're treating each other and what we're teaching each other and the concepts and ideas of what we're supposed to live up to. Yes. Yeah.
And the other piece that I want to say is that, just to continue here, is that in our society, we talk about the masculine and the feminine. And so again, I want to emphasize that we as human beings we are full spectrum humans.
Yes.
Right. And society has decided here in the US, for example, that masculinity, we're going to ascribe certain human traits to that. So we're going to say that what's masculine is, fill in the blank. We all kind of know that box, right? Yeah. So stoic, leader, physically tough and strong, heterosexual, dominant, willing and able to have sex with women, lots of women, anytime,
anywhere, yeah.
Physically able, don't have any physical disabilities, breadwinner, have dominance over the partner probably, and these vary in different communities, and there's variations, but anyway, there are traits that are ascribed as called masculine, and then there are other traits which are referred to as feminine, the nurturing, the loving, and then there's consequences for men when they express any of those traits that are stereotypically viewed as feminine.
Yes.
And it creates a major lifelong conundrum for men when they're told that they can't express however you want to proportion of their natural humanity.
Yes.
Right. And so I think part of the challenge here is to just create forums where men can assert their full spectrum, beautiful humanity, and challenge those notions of masculinity that are harmful or restraining, so as to promote more health and wellness for everyone.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Amazing.
liberation.
How many of these events have you done?
So thus far, there have been 28 live events in the US, Canada, Chile, Gaza, and the West Bank.
Amazing. Wow. Gaza and the West Bank.
Yeah, so
What was
that
it
was
like?
in
Was it
partnership.
different in the different parts of the world?
So that was in partnership with UN Women, or in collaboration. So they hired me as a consultant to do a training of trainers for staff from 11 civil society organizations working in Gaza and the West Bank.
Wow.
And just on the methodology of the Men's Story Project. And so they incorporated it into their work of a campaign which they called Because I Am a Man. So they didn't call it Men's Story Project Productions, just to be clear. But anyway, but it was the same format. And one of the, and I know what the topics were about. I still need to have someone sit with me to actually translate the stories verbatim.
Yep.
But the team leaders shared with me that the response to the work from the audience members, that a key theme was, what took you so long? Like, why didn't this happen years ago? And thank you, and that this should continue.
Yeah.
And I know that the teams also formed strong, emotional connections amongst themselves as they were getting ready to share their stories publicly and so on.
Yeah, beautiful. So. Well, all right, as we're wrapping up, I'm curious, what do you want men to know, whether it's around participating or supporting? How can we help your project actually expand in the world?
Well, so thanks for the question. So there's a couple different ways. One is participating. So if you'd like to create local productions, we actually have a training cohort starting in October. And if you go to the website, which is mensstoryproject.org with 2 S's, mensstoryproject.org, there's an announcement that you can click on the homepage for that training cohort.
And that would be someone who brings in other men, or someone who's learning to train to be it, or train to speak at the event?
So this would be for folks who want to actually create new productions, like get a group of men together to create productions.
Yeah.
So that opportunity is there to actually create your own new productions. Mm-hmm. I also do travel to campuses and community, places to give presentations and trainings and workshops. I'm happy to do that and connect with folks that way. We have 2 films that people are welcome to get and do film screenings around. And then certainly publicity, blogging, funding is super helpful if folks want to make tax-deductible donations to help the work grow. So all of the above. And we also have a celebrity production that's getting underway. So if folks want to connect around that and have ideas on celebrities who may be interested in this work, that'll be also very welcome. That's going to be in partnership with Harry Belafonte's Sankofa.org and some other groups.
I love it. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for doing this. Is there any last thing you want to leave men with?
Just that we're all fundamentally beautiful humans, and I like to use the metaphor of plants that grow naturally toward the light. I think we all know in our heart what's true for us, what's beautiful, what promotes health and well-being. And insofar as any, kind of internalized notions of manhood are getting in the way, part of leadership, I think, is really like the fish noticing the water and asking what's working and what isn't. Mm-hmm. And what can I do if something isn't working very well to take action to shift it in my own life, and then more broadly in my community. Yeah. So I just want to, I guess I would just end by saying that I believe in the fundamental beauty of men, like human beauty. And I'm really happy to be working on a project that helps support that full expression.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for you. And I too believe in the fundamentally, beautiful nature of all of us. And
all of us, yeah.
And men too. There's something about men that through my work, I, fell in love with men as men were showing me their vulnerability. And it's pretty amazing to see now that anytime I run into a man or interact with a man, like I know that vulnerable part of him exists, whether he shows it or not.
Mm.
I feel so grateful for that. And I know that some people haven't had that experience. So for you
Yeah.
to be, producing these events and helping other people see inside, or behind the masks or behind the curtain of what men can put out into the world feels really powerful and important to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And to be clear, also, these are, so I produced and directed 8 of these events,
Mm-hmm.
and then the others were produced and directed locally by local teams. And so the whole idea is really to support the locally led and locally relevant creation of these kinds of platforms for men to do this kind of unusually candid public sharing. So yeah, the power of invitation and permission for this unusual kind of candor definitely is has been amazing to see, and I'm excited to see this project grow.
Me too. Me too. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Mm-hmm. I'm so glad you joined us for today's episode of Man Alive. I hope you enjoyed our conversation and it gave you something to consider and explore in your life. If you like what you heard, I'd be so grateful for you to subscribe and write a quick review that helps men like you find us. And again, head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz or text the word ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 to get a sense of how you can become a better lover and leader. You'll start to see how you can be both more respected and desired in your unique and genuine way. If you don't feel as confident or as excited about life or love as you'd like to be, this quiz is a really great starting point and will guide you toward a more passionate love life and a more inspiring and successful career. So again, text ALIVE, ALIVE, to 44144 or head over to shanajamescoaching.com/quiz. Join us each week for a new episode of Man Alive.